And good evening, Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Welcome to another episode of Steelers Friday Night Six Pack. I am your host, as always, Tony Defio. And I thank you for joining me on this very, very cold Friday night in Pittsburgh. And as I say every week, I hope it's warm wherever you are. Certainly not 15 degrees, which it is right now, according to my laptop and my Weather Channel app on my phone. Pretty cold. It's 15 and it feels like it's colder according to the real feel, but who cares about that? 15's enough, right? You don't need to make it any more dramatic. But I thank you for joining me. And before I continue, just wanted to, as always, please encourage you to like and subscribe to our Behind the Steel Curtain YouTube channel, where we bring you live shows each and every day of the week, including this show, The Hangover, Steelers Preview, Steelers Postgame, Know Your Enemy, which is now the Curtain Call, I believe. Is that it? I don't know. Yeah, it's the Curtain Call with Michael Beck and Jeffrey Benedict. We have Touchdown Under with the boys from Aussie Land. So we have Scobro Show. Yes. How long have I been doing this? A couple years now. Can't remember the names of the shows, but that's okay. You know them. We are one of the most popular Steelers podcasting platforms there is. So I'm sure you know the shows. You know them quite well. So please check those out live on YouTube or live on Facebook. So if you're watching me on Facebook, you know that. You know that you get a live Steelers show every day. So I thank you for joining me on Facebook. And please, as I always say, it's Facebook. You're rough and tumble. You're bare knuckle on Facebook. So please be nice. Please be nice and civilized while you're watching the show and participating. And if you can't catch any of these live shows live, you can catch them after the fact on any audio platform of your choosing. I personally like iHeartRadio, but you can catch them on Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Behind the Steel Curtain's podcast platform. And we also have a whole host of audio-only shows that, of course, you can catch on any audio platform, including the Live Mic with Michael Beck, From the Cutting Room Floor with Jeffrey Benedict, Let's Ride with Jeff Hartman, The Stat Geek with Dave Schofield, The War Room with Matty Peverall, What Yin's Talking About with Kyle Christ. I think I said the name right. If not, then I'm probably sacrilegious. I'm sorry. But he just had me on earlier because well, I don't want to spoil it, but I won an award. So you have to tune in to the next What You're Talking About with Kyle and I think he's the only one. I'm not sure who does the show, but you have to tune into that show to find out which award I won, and you won't be sorry. So please check that out, and of course check out Behind the Steel Curtain, the website. We bring you news, commentary, film breakdown, anything Steelers related. You can find it there. To me, it's the best Steelers site there is, other than Steelers.com. And I think it's better than Steelers.com because they don't have like Mark Davis and Matty Peverall and all those great personalities. Shannon White, who brings you so much just really reasoned and rational insight every week on The Hangover. Brian Anthony Davis, our hardworking podcasting manager. Of course, all the writers, Jeffrey Benedict, me, well, not me, but, other people like Jeff Hartman and Michael, you name it. There's so many writers on there. So I think it's the best personally, but I'm biased. Like my mother, she says I'm handsome. She might be biased. I don't know. Maybe she has good taste. I don't know, but I think personally Behind the Steel Curtain is the greatest Steelers website there is. So please check it out. It's your one-stop shop for all your Steelers needs. And let's check out the live chat before I continue. And Jared Devil, I saw Jared Devil was the first one in. So welcome, Jared Devil. Brian O'Toole, who I haven't seen in a few weeks. George Teston, Knight Rider 16. Brad Jewett. Let's see, did I get everybody? That's everybody so far. Dave Covey, who already asked the burning question that everybody's been asking since last Sunday. Who should be the Steelers' next quarterback? And I promise you, Dave, I will get to that in a bit. But before I get to that, and of course, John Knox joins us, Greg W. Before I get to that, I just want to talk about last Sunday and how the season ended with the 42-21 loss to the Chiefs in the wild card game at Arrowhead Stadium on Sunday Night Football on NBC. And I think if you're being honest with yourself, you're not shocked by the outcome of that game. I harkened back to a few years earlier in Colin Cowherd, and I wish I could find this stat online somewhere, but I can't. But on his weekly show, his national radio show leading up to the Steelers and Jaguars divisional round playoff game following the 2017 season, he listed a stat that said that teams that won in the regular season, teams that defeated another team, I should say, by 21 points or more in the regular season were like, I don't know, 90% likely or however you put it. They were overwhelming favorites to win if the two teams met again in the playoffs. And I kind of wanted to keep it to myself last week, even though a lot of people, including Brian, and everybody was optimistic that seeing the Chiefs on December 26th and being exposed to their strategy and their tendencies and everything else would benefit them in the rematch, even though they lost 36-10 that game. So I wanted to keep that to myself, but in the back of my mind, I kind of thought, they probably don't have much of a chance because the NFL is all about matchups. And as we saw in 2017, the Jaguars pretty much did to the Steelers in the postseason what they did to them in the regular season, and they beat them up. They beat them up pretty good. And yeah, it was close early. Actually, Pittsburgh had the lead early in the second half, or the second quarter, I should say, thanks to a forced fumble by Cam Hayward on some kind of wildcat play by the Chiefs. Why they ever decided to run and play like that with Patrick Mahomes as their quarterback is beyond me, but maybe that's a lesson learned for them. But it was like a wildcat play. And Cam forced a fumble. TJ Watt picked up the fumble and took it in for a touchdown, and it was 7-0. And holy cow, is this happening? And as I said last week, the best way for Pittsburgh to win that game was to keep things low scoring and keep things ugly. And it really was ugly over the first quarter or so of that game. The two teams kept exchanging punts, and Pittsburgh had a turnover early. Thanks to TJ Watt, who tipped the pass, and Devin Bush intercepted it. And of course, later on, the scoop and score by TJ Watt, thanks to Cam Hayward. So it was ugly early, and it was certainly ugly for the Steelers offense, which, you could say that for every game in 2021, really. I mean, every game this year, they started off ugly on offense. I mean, name one game where they start off hot. I mean, maybe the Broncos, maybe the Seahawks. I mean, the Bears, I don't know. Maybe they were hot in those games for them. I mean, there were certainly a few games where they got hot late. The Chargers, Vikings. But by and large, it was an ugly start for the Steelers offense in every game this week, or every game this year. And Sunday night in the postseason was certainly no exception. And after the Steelers scored on defense, the Chiefs came right down the field and scored a touchdown. And they just kept scoring until it was 35-7, and by then it was game over. And to me, the absolute point where I knew the game was over was when Travis Kelce scored that touchdown on 3rd and 20. I guess it was. I think that was the third touchdown. But anyway, they scored 2 touchdowns. The Chiefs scored 2 touchdowns in the last 2 minutes or so of the first half to make it 21-7. And I pretty much knew that was it. Because, first of all, in order for Pittsburgh to come back and win that game, the defense would have to really rise up and just stifle the Chiefs over the last 2 quarters. And in conjunction with that, the offense would have to suddenly be this juggernaut, the scoring machine, and score at least 17 points or whatever, 15 points to win the game. And I just didn't see that happening. And of course, the Chiefs offense never really stopped scoring until they scored 42 points. And Pittsburgh's offense really didn't score again, or at all, I should say, again at all, until it was garbage time, when it was 35-7. So the game went pretty much as I expected. I mean, I didn't expect Pittsburgh to have a 7-0 lead early on, thanks to a defensive touchdown. But overall, it went how I expected. And, a lot of people, I was arguing with people at the end of the game, because what else was there to do? It was 42-14, and then eventually 42-21. So there was nothing else to do but argue with people on Twitter at the end of that game. And people were blaming saying that the defense was out of gas, and it was the offense's fault that the defense gave up 42 points. Okay, maybe, I guess, but the Chiefs scored on 6 straight drives. After Pittsburgh took a 7-0 lead on the Watt touchdown, the Chiefs scored on 6 straight drives. Now, I realize the offense was horrible, and it was 3 and out for 3 and out through 2+ quarters of the game. But if you're an elite defense, if you're a defense where you have the defensive player of the year, you have Cam Hayward, you have Minkah Fitzpatrick, you have Joe Hayden, you should rise up and be and stop that offense at least once over that 6 drive span, and they couldn't stop them at all. So, yeah, maybe the offense could have helped. It could have made things easier for the defense by having maybe 1 or 2 sustained drives. But the fact of the matter is that offense wasn't capable of that all year. We saw it. I mean, you saw that, how the offense performed against the Bills in week 1. That's how it performed all year. There was never a change. There might have been some spurts where the offense looked pretty good, but it was never a consistently good offense at all. I mean, so to expect that offense to suddenly in the playoffs put together sustained drives and take time off the clock and be efficient and be productive, I mean, that was asking for way too much. So the defense had to rise up and really take control of that game and do what it did against the Bills in week 1. And I realize the Chiefs have a much better offense. I shouldn't say much better, but they have a better offense than the Bills have, but it's not much better. I mean, Josh Allen's a NFL MVP candidate. They have a pretty good thing going on there in Buffalo. We saw that last week against the Patriots, where they blew the Patriots out of the water in Buffalo. So that's pretty much what had to happen on Sunday night in order for Pittsburgh to have a chance in that game. Now, of course, in Buffalo, Tyson Alualu was still around, and he was such an important part of that defense. And I think we found out how important he was after he suffered that season-ending injury in week 2 against the Raiders. And the defense was really never the same after that, especially against the run. So, but having said that, that's the kind of performance they needed to put out there in order to win that game, what they did in Buffalo in week 1. They needed to hold the Chiefs to 17, 20 points, something like that, and maybe have a defensive touchdown, which they did, and, hope the offense could score a couple touchdowns and squeak out a victory. But the offense lived up to its billing. It was pathetic. The defense kind of, I think, bleeped the bed by giving up 6 straight touchdowns from the early second quarter through late fourth quarter, early second quarter through early fourth quarter. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that game. It was Ben Roethlisberger's last game as a Steeler, presumably. And he did. I don't even say okay because he didn't look good in that game, but he did lead them on a couple of second half touchdown drives. You might say it was garbage time, but still, he led them to a couple of touchdowns, and I'm glad he went out at least with his head held high anyway. But as far as the Steelers season as a whole, I think they, based on how the offense performed from week 1 on, they overachieved. There's no question about it. They overachieved as a team. A lot of the national people were saying they would be lucky to win 7 or 8 games. And the way they played all year, especially on offense, it turned out to be true. They were lucky to win 9. They won 9 games, but how they did that was a miracle. They needed help from the defense. They needed help with special teams, and that's how they kind of managed to win 9 games. But the defense wasn't even as good as it was the previous 2 years, and that's because of the absence of Alu. Of course, Stephon Tuitt missed the whole year. As good as Alex Highsmith was as a second-year player, and I think he has a lot of potential. Opposite T.J. Watt, outside linebacker, he wasn't Bud Dupree. He wasn't 2020 Bud Dupree. So of course Joe Hayden, missed several games with injury. Mika was I think he was he had a really good year, probably better than people thought, but he really wasn't the high impact player that he had been his previous 2 years here. So, the defense took a step back. So, for them to, as overmatched as they looked for 17 weeks in 2021, for them to make the playoffs, I think was it was a feather in the cap for the organization, for Mike Tomlin, head coach. I know he has his critics, and he's going to continue to have his critics. And, I think it's funny, the juxtaposition, if I said that word right, with Steeler fans following that game. A lot of smart fans were willing to concede the fact that Pittsburgh probably didn't belong on the same field as Kansas City in that wild card game. The Chiefs were clearly superior. And, the fact that they blew the Steelers out was not a shock. But at the same time, they're saying, they were out-coached. Tomlin didn't have his players ready to play. They need to clean house. They need to get rid of, at minimum, both coordinators. And, of course, in a perfect world for them, Tomlin needs to go. I just thought that was funny. But if you're looking at, everything that happened to this team, starting with last spring, with the start of the new calendar year for the NFL, and the financial straits that Pittsburgh was in, as far as, the salary cap and all the free agents that they could potentially lose. And they lost Mike Hilton, they lost Bud Dupree, they lost Matt Filer. They initially lost Tyson Alualu before he had a change of heart and decided to re-sign here before he could sign his contract with the Jaguars. If you look at everything that happened, David DeCastro, as it turned out, was suffering from an injury that he could never really recover from. They had to cut him. So, all the rebuilding that they did, they had to rely on so many young players from their last draft class. You're talking about, of course, Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, Kendrick Green, who ultimately was benched by the end of the year, Dan Moore, Trey Norwood, the punter, Presley Harvin. So Loudermilk, I think it covers everybody. So, everything that happened, everything that they had to go through for them to have the year they did, I think that was actually better than I thought it would be. So where was I? let's see what we have here as far as the live chat. I kind of lost my train of thought, so I got to regroup. We have Michael O'Malley's with us, Justin Meneke, Brad Jewett, Richard McKinney, Evgeny Crosby. I don't know what he tries. I don't know what he means by that. Mark Tobin, E.M. Marcus, Jarrett Tiffany Jones, John Knox. Did I say that? Terry Glover. All right. Anyway, I think I droned on enough about last week's game in the 2021 season. Let's talk about eras, and of course, Sunday's loss to the Chiefs marked the end of an important era in Steelers history, and that's the era of Ben Roethlisberger, Big Ben. From 2004 through 2021, he was the straw that stirred the drink for the Steelers. He was the quote Ric Flair. He was what was causing all this, and that's the resurgence for the Steelers as far as being Super Bowl contenders and ultimately champions with victories in 40 and 43. And of course, they made it to 45. And he was really the missing link for them. If you know Steelers history, they struggled they didn't struggle, but they had a resurgence in the 90s under Bill Cowher. Came close a lot, but never quite got over the hump as far as winning that one for the thumb. And it seemed like it always came down to quarterback play in the postseason. That's what they were missing, that franchise quarterback to really make that one pass or have that one drive to put them over the top. And of course, in the early 2000s, it was the same thing. With Cordell, he was pretty good, but he just wasn't a franchise guy. Tommy Maddox was pretty good, but not a franchise guy. And in the end, neither one of them could really make those key plays at the key moments to win the important games in the postseason. I mean, they won some games in the postseason, but they couldn't take them all the way. And then Ben came along, and he proved to be the catalyst in putting them over the top. And he was their most pivotal, most important, most critical player for the better part of 18 years here. And he became that symbol for that second Super Bowl era, which was the 00s through 2010. And for so many fans out there who are probably 40 and under, I'm almost 50. So if anybody, I shouldn't say 40 and under, but anybody who's 30 and under, you probably can't even picture anybody else being the quarterback of this team. So that's the larger than life figure he was here. That's the shadow he cast as far as a legacy, and now he's gone. So it was a great 18 years. There's no question. I know a lot of people think they should have won more Super Bowls. There's the whole, that whole sentiment out there. It's been out there for a decade, really, but that they wasted, 10 years of his career. If you go back to maybe 2011, 2012, but I think they maximized his career. If we're being honest, I mean, they had this Super Bowl team in the early 00s, and they just needed that one guy to put him over the top, and he was that guy. And they made it to 3 Super Bowls, won 2 of them. And then the 2010s were kind of like they were more of a rebuilding phase than we're ever willing to admit. And but because he was here, they were able to rebuild plus stay competitive, which they did. I mean, the 2012 and 2013 were a bit shaky. They missed the playoffs. They finished 8-8 both years. But once they kind of rebuilt their roster a little bit, at least on offense, they rebuilt the line. Of course, they found Antonio Brown, they found Lev Bell, and they were an offensive juggernaut. And they, by 2015, they were true. They released I don't want to say bona fide contenders, but they were legit contenders again. Certainly in the AFC. Maybe not. They weren't the complete team that they were in Big Ben's first 6-7 years, but they were definitely good enough to compete for the AFC title and maybe make it back to the Super Bowl, which they did between 2014 when they won the division for the first time in 4 years through 2017 when they were 13-3 and they lost to the Jaguars. So they were legit contenders. They were a top heavy team on offense. That's what carried the day for them. So, people say they wasted his last 10 years, but I think they did better than most teams do coming off of a Super Bowl run. When you're talking about the salary cap problems that teams run into now, which they did. 2013 they had to cut James Harrison. They had nothing as far as cap space. So it was a tough time. It would have been easy for them to sort of fall off the cliff and be a 4 or 5 win team, but it never came to that for them. So I think they did better in the 2010s than a lot of teams would have. So to say that they wasted Ben's last 10 years here, I think that's foolhardy, or it's unfair to say. I think they did better than a lot of teams would have done. If you look at most teams in their position, the Saints with Drew Brees, they kind of did this. They kind of had like the same era that the Steelers did. They after the Saints won in 2009, it was kind of tough for them to get back to the top again. They never quite made it. And I think the Steelers were the same with Ben. The Packers with Rodgers. I mean, they were a little sexier. They made it to a few more NFC title games, but they never made it back to the Super Bowl after they beat Pittsburgh in 2010. So I think it's tough. I think they proved, all three of those teams proved that it's tough to sustain that. It's tough to repeat that kind of championship success, especially when you have a quarterback who you have to pay so much money to. You have to kind of sacrifice other areas of your team to keep those guys, fat and happy financially, because it's just the way it is. It might be nice to pay those guys, to see, ask those guys to take a pay cut and take less so you can, keep the rest of your roster strong. But that's not the real world. That's not how the real world operates. And with the exception of Tom Brady, that never happens. And even with him, there have been accusations that he was taken care of off the books in New England. So, I think the 00s, or the 2010s, I should say, for the Steelers were a lot like the 80s for them. But it was just sexier because they had, a Pro Bowl quarterback, an all-pro receiver, an all-pro running back, and an all-pro laden offensive line. So I think it kind of looked better in the 2010s than it did in the 80s. But I think it was essentially the same kind of thing. It was a transition from a Super Bowl era, and it proved to be tough to repeat that success because it's just how it is in sports. So I don't look at them as wasting Ben's last 9-10 years here. I look at it as him being the key element that kept them relevant, maybe longer than they would have been otherwise had he retired or left here in 2011, 2012. And, so I don't have a problem with how things unfolded in the previous decade. Do I wish they would have won more? Of course I do. I won every year. I mean, especially 2017. I really did think they had the team to win it all in 2017. And if it wasn't for a really stupid and convoluted catch rule, they probably would have had the number 1 seed. They probably would have faced a really inferior Titans team in the divisional round instead of the Sam Jaguars team that beat them by 3 touchdowns earlier that year. And then you're playing the AFC Championship game at home against, who knows, the Jaguars, the Patriots. Now, of course, both teams would have been tough outs, especially the Jaguars, who, again, beat them up in the regular season. But still, it would have been an easier path than having to go through Jacksonville again, albeit at home, and then having to travel to New England for the AFC Championship game. So I think that was their best bet. But other than that year, I think they did well to just be in the mix because of the shortcomings they had on defense. That was a tough thing for them. You had a historic defense during that Super Bowl era. How many times did they finish number 1 overall during that era under Dick LeBeau? And then all those guys got old and retired. You had to cut James Harrison. He came back, of course, but he was a reserve basically after he came back. But that defense was kind of gone, and then you had to try to rebuild. And it's a lot easier said than done. And I think that was proven. And the fact that it took them really till 2019 to build a similar defense shows you just how hard it is to do. So, especially when you have a quarterback making $35-40 million a year. So, I as I said already, I'll always be grateful for what Ben did for this organization. He made it a marquee franchise again. He made it a relevant franchise again. He allowed us all to brag about Super Bowls again, which, let's face it, after the Cowboys won in the 90s again, they were the standard bearer for Lombardis. And then, of course, they won 2 Pittsburgh won 2 in the 2000s, and it allowed us to brag again, and that's because of Ben Roethlisberger. So I'll always be thankful for that. But at the same time, it's as sad as I am to see him go. I'm also pretty excited for this new era to begin. Who's going to be their new quarterback? And I was asked that question earlier, and be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know. It is wide open. It really is, isn't it? It's a wide open race right now. I mean, it could be, the smart money, as far as a lot of people are concerned, is Mason Rudolph, with Dwayne Haskins being right behind him. If 2 in-house candidates, of course, Mason's been here since 2018. He's been the backup since 2019. He's been with them. He knows the locker room a little bit. He obviously knows the coaching staff, and they know him. So he's the smart money. Of course, Dwayne Haskins, with his first round pedigree and his first round talent, his first round arm, he definitely is a candidate. So, those guys, are going to be given, according to Mike Tomlin in his press conference on Tuesday, his end of season press conference, they're going to be given a fair shot to compete. He didn't say they were going to be the only 2, but he said they were going to be given a chance to compete for the starting job in 2022. As far as any other candidates, I don't know. If it were me, and I've been saying this for a few years now, I would, provided you don't have to reach at 20, I would draft somebody in the first round, and provided he's not a total train wreck in the preseason and training camp, I would throw him in there and let him take his lumps and learn and grow and get experience. Because as soon as you draft somebody, the clock is ticking, and to let somebody sit on the bench for 2 or 3 years, to me, that doesn't seem smart, especially a quarterback, because as soon as you find out about a quarterback, the better, a young quarterback. So That's what I would do. I think that's a smart move for them because, they have some problems. I mean, they are in a rebuilding mode, whether we want to admit it or not, whether they want to admit it or not. And I think they're almost as allergic as an organization to admitting or even saying the word rebuild as we are. But I mean, it's pretty obvious. They're in a rebuild, so they have problems. They still have to overhaul that line. They have some optimistic and hopeful candidates in Dan Moore and Dotson, but you're still uncertain about Green, and you have other holes to fill on that line. Of course, the defense needs work. Is Stephon Tuitt coming back? Is Alulu coming back? So you have to address that area. Is Joe Hayden coming back? He's a free agent. You have to address that. You have Terrell Edmonds, who they didn't pick up his fifth-year option. So you have a lot of areas where that need addressed, right? So in addition to quarterback, so I don't know. I mean, to go out and bring in an Aaron Rodgers or a Russell Wilson for as much as they're going to cost, both in terms of draft capital and in terms of the salary cap, in terms of salary. If this was a team that was a quarterback away from winning it all, like the 2012 Broncos, I would say, yeah, do what you can to bring those guys in because, a championship is a lifetime thing that we talk about, obviously, for life. We still talk about the 70s titles. We talk about 08 and 05. So, obviously, if you win a title, it's something that sort of props the franchise up for forever. So you do what you can to win one when you have the opportunity. But I don't think they're there right now. So to spend what you have to spend to get one of those guys in here, I think that wouldn't be smart. As far as the second tier guys, Derek Carr, Jimmy G, Mariota, Tyrod Taylor, or whatever, second, third, as far as bringing one of those guys in, I mean, they would certainly, most of those players, I think, would be, especially when you're talking about guys like Jimmy G and Garoppolo and Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, they would be certainly Andy Dalton. I think they would be okay bridge quarterbacks who could, make the offense run smoothly enough in 2022. But, what's your goal if you're the Steelers? Is it your goal just to remain competitive, or do you want to continue to rebuild? Do you want to get a youngster in there, a quarterback, and see what if you can develop somebody? Do you want to see what you have in Dwayne Haskins? Do you want to see if Mason Rudolph can take that next step? So I certainly don't see Wilson or Russ or Wilson or Rodgers as the next guy. See, like somebody like Derek Carr or Jimmy G, I don't see. Again, I mean, I would be okay with them because I think they'd be an upgrade over what you had last year. But would it be worth bringing them in if your team isn't ready to be true contenders in 2022? If you still have all these other areas you have to address, would it be worth it to bring one of those guys in and, spend what you have to spend, like 20, 25 million plus draft capital, just to say you made the playoffs again, or is it better to just kind of bottom out a little bit and give a youngster the range, or continue to build the rest of your roster while you let Mason or Dwayne Haskins quarterback all of 2022? I don't know. So to answer your question, who do I think is going to be the new quarterback next year? I have no idea. No clue. And we're probably not going to know until the end of training camp. That's just the reality of it. Unless they do go out and get a Wilson or a Rodgers, we're probably not going to know who their starter is going to be until the end of training camp. That's how wide open it is. And I really haven't had that kind of situation for, gosh, I mean, even in 2003, they knew Tommy Maddox was going to be the guy. In 2002, they knew it was going to be Cordell. In 2001, they knew it was going to be Cordell. So probably since 2000, that's the last time that the quarterback spot was this wide open for the Steelers. So it's going to be interesting times. So I'm looking forward to it. And I have rambled on long enough. Now it's time to take some questions and comments from the live chat. So let's see what we have before I sign off for the night, because I am tired. All right. Mark Tubman says TJ for Defensive Player of the Year. I think there's a pretty good chance he's going to win it this year. I mean, if he does, it'd be great. If he doesn't, I guess it would be unfortunate, but just as long as he continues to get 20-some sacks a year and is in contention for that award, I think the defense would be that much better for it. And George Teston says Rex Ryan, defensive coordinator. I don't see it. I mean, I think it's going to be, unless there's some mandate from Art II to hire from outside the organization, I think it's going to be Terrell Austin. That seems to be how they do business now. They promote from within. And let's not forget, Keith Butler, people were praising him prior to this year. And they were critical of him prior to 2019. What was the difference? They had studs in 2019 and 2020. Prior to 2019, they didn't. And this year, they were lacking in studs because of Tuitt's situation. Of course, Alou. Bush wasn't himself. Even Watt wasn't himself for many games in 2022 or 2021. So, it's really not about the coaching. I think it's more about the horses, and they just didn't have the horses on defense this year. And that's why suddenly Keith Butler is on the hot seat again, even though he might not even be the guy designing the defense anymore. It might be Mike Tomlin. Excuse me. So I don't see it's. I don't think it's going to be Rex Ryan. If it's anybody, it's going to be. Excuse me. If it's going to be anybody from the outside, it'll be your Fangio, whatever, somebody like that. I don't think Rex is going to want to come out of his slumber to be the new DC of the Steelers. Ryan O'Toole says the O-line killed the entire offense, just like last season. I think that's true, but I also think that. Excuse me, Ben's his regression played a part in that, and I also think it we have to remember it wasn't that long ago they had a first-team Pro Bowl running back and a first-team All-Pro receiver as their two main weapons. So it's hard to make up. It's hard to make up for that. And it was a pretty bad year offensively for them. And I think there's a lot of things to blame for that. And yeah, the line is to blame, but also Ben is to blame as far as his physical regression. But it happens. And this is Justin Meneke, and he says the Steelers must be turning into the Cleveland Browns is what I see it as. Well, I mean, here's a team that, on paper, if you look at the stats, 23rd in offense, 24th in defense, like minus 55 and plus in point differential. They finished last against the run, 29th on the ground on offense. And yet they still have found a way to make the playoffs. That's what you call a proud organization. Would the Browns have been able to do that? The Browns, they were everybody's darling in the last offseason. Going to the Super Bowl, they're going to win the division at the very least, and yet they finished 8-9. So are they really the Browns, or are they just a team that's going through some struggles right now? Because life after the Super Bowl, even though it was a decade ago, is not easy for any organization or for most organizations. So I don't think they're the Browns. I think they're still a pretty proud organization. And I think they should be commended overall for what they did last year, making it to the playoffs with the problems that they had. I don't think a lot of teams would have been able to do that. So I commend Mike Tomlin for the job he did last year. John Knox says, anyone who is at least 50, well, I'll be 50 soon, in a few months, remembers the post-Bradshaw years. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't the Lions either. Yeah, I remember that. I remember when Bradshaw retired in summer of 84, and they went with David Woodley. They had Mark Malone, Scott Campbell, eventually Bobby Brister, Neil O'Donnell. I can go on and on and on. It wasn't pretty, but they were not horrible either. So, but it's like I said, I've been saying this for 2 years now. I think they learned their lesson from the post-Bradshaw years. I think they, especially Chuck Noll, believed that they could duplicate what they did in the 70s by, emphasizing defense and the running game. And they kind of forgot that Bradshaw was the missing link for their, even though he struggled mightily, when he figured it all out in the mid-70s, that's when they got over the hump and started winning Super Bowls. Yeah, the defense was dominant. The running game was the best in the business. But it wasn't until Bradshaw figured it out as the quarterback that they were able to get over the hump. And I think they spent many years stuck in that philosophy. And even under Cowher in the 90s, it was all smash mouth, Blitzburg, run the ball, be conservative. And nothing really changed as far as winning Super Bowls until they brought Ben in here and took the handcuffs off him in the second season. And that's when they won. So I think they learned their lesson. They now realize as an organization what the most important thing is, and that's quarterback. And their defense, even though they became champions in the 70s and they became this marquee organization, it was the first time for them. And they, maybe didn't necessarily know what it took to climb back up to, and get back on top of the mountain again. And maybe they needed that 20-year lesson to finally know, to finally understand what it means, what it takes to be a championship team. And yeah, you need a great defense, you need great coaching, but you definitely need a great quarterback. So I'm not saying they're gonna find their next guy right away, but I think they're not gonna neglect it like they did in the 80s and 90s. It's not going to be like mid-round picks, maybe second or third round picks if they're lucky. It's going to be first round picks, or it's going to be an accomplished veteran. They're going to take the quarterback position much more seriously this time around than they did in the 80s and 90s. So it's not going to be a 20-year gap of between, really good quarterbacks, in my opinion. And this is from Will Elamagar, and he says, well, I assume he means David, the Castro ever play again? I don't know. I assume he's not going to play ever again for the Steelers. I think he's done with them. So I don't know about if I were playing the NFL again, but he's not going to play for the Steelers anymore. I know that much. This is from John Knox, and he says, nobody thought the Steelers would go to the Super Bowl anytime soon back in 2003. They were 6-10 that year. And 2 years later, they won it. But obviously the reason why is because they found Ben. And, to a slightly lesser extent, they found Troy Polamalu, and he was, pretty important for them on defense. But that's the thing. You need to strike gold. You need to find lightning in a bottle. And they were able to find that with Ben in 2004. So outside Steeler fan kind of reaffirms what I said earlier about, some people not knowing any other quarterback besides Ben. He says, Ben has been my adulthood. There you go. Yeah. I started following the team right when their first Super Bowl dynasty crumbled in the early 80s. And, Bradshaw, he was still really good. But, when he left after 83, it's not like I watched him play for 20-some years or 18 years. But there's so many people out there that, all they know is Ben Roethlisberger. Just like for me, all I knew was Chuck Noll as head coach. And I couldn't fathom anybody else being the head coach of this team. And I was like, oh my God, life after Noll is going to be horrible. But the truth of the matter was life with Noll was pretty subpar from like 85 through 91. And when they brought Cowher in 92, I mean, he was a breath of fresh air. He revitalized the team and the fan base. And, they didn't win in the 90s. They didn't win at all, but they were pretty darn close. So I guess the point of that is, yeah, Ben has been, by and large, he was fantastic. But the last few years were not so great with him as far as his production, his performance. So, the next person they bring in is probably not going to be able to match Ben's success. But it doesn't mean that next quarterback can't be successful. So I'm excited about the future with this team. Evgeny Crosby says, if you go into next season with Rudolph and Haskins duking it out for the starting job, don't even bother. I guess it all depends on what your goals are. Evgeny, Gino Crosby. If your goal is to win it all, well, yeah, probably not. You're not going to win it all. But if your goal is to continue to rebuild the rest of your roster and save money at the quarterback spot while you reinforce your line, your offensive and defensive line, and maybe figure some things out in the secondary, maybe even figure some things out at receiver, and then you kind of make your overall team better, even with Haskins or Mason as your quarterback, then I think you can go into 2023 in a much stronger position, and then you can find your future quarterback, whether it be in the draft or as a free agent. So I guess it all depends. I mean, we have to remember, what they did this past year, and I talked about this on Monday on The Hangover, is they kind of did two things at once. They kind of served two masters. They allowed Ben to go out with a proper send-off. Unlike 2020, where there were no fans in the stands, he went out with a proper send-off. He got to say goodbye, especially in week 17. Yeah, week 17 against the Browns on Monday Night Football at Heinz Field. He got to say goodbye. That was something great to see. It was emotional. It was fun. It was fulfilling. But they also engaged in a massive overhaul of their roster, especially on offense. They revamped, or they started over entirely with the offensive line. They brought a new running back in. They found themselves a new tight end, presumably who will be a two guys in Harris and Freiermuth. They could be superstars in this league for many years to come. The line, it wasn't going to happen overnight, but they found a budding starting left tackle in Dan Moore. Obviously, Dotson is Dotson. Everybody loves him at left guard. So you got 40% of your line in place. So they have to keep working on that. But the point is they started a massive overhaul of their roster last year. and they got to say goodbye to their maybe the best player they've ever had in Ben Roethlisberger, and they made the playoffs. So, all things considered, not bad. And Michael O'Malley says the standard is substandard, but again, it's not easy to duplicate what they did in the 00s. They're not going to win every year. They're not even going to be serious contenders every year. It's just not how it works in sports. And part of what made them substandard the past decade was the fact that they had a quarterback they had to pay so much money to. They had a receiver that they had to pay a lot of money to. They had a running back who cost a lot. So they had a line that they had, to try to have a whole team, a complete team like they had in the 00s. The odds of that happening again in the 2010s were pretty small. Yet they remained competitive and they were mostly relevant in the 2010s. So you have to, for the most part, commend them for not totally falling off the map and becoming irrelevant. So on that note, I'm getting up against it as far as time. So I will say goodbye. It was a fun show. And I had fun interacting with you guys as always. With my new job, I'm kind of sleepy this time of night, but that's okay because, it keeps me going. I hope you enjoy that NFL action this weekend, the divisional round. I think it's going to be pretty exciting. And, of course, you're not going to stop with your quarterback speculation. And we're in the infancy, in the toddler stage, the embryonic stage of that, I guess I should say. And we have a few more months to go before we find out who the new quarterback of the Steelers is going to be next year. So it should be a pretty fun and exciting offseason. And I look forward to it. So until I talk to you on Monday on The Hangover with Brian and Shannon, you guys have a great weekend. And as always, go Steelers.